Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Roundtable. Division I Performance Nutrition Teams discuss top concerns when fueling athletes. I'm Jennifer Grebo, Editor-in-Chief of Nutritional Outlook, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are pleased to bring you this webcast presented by Nutritional Outlook and sponsored by NSF International. NSF International's Health Sciences Certification Program helps ensure the highest levels of product and ingredient quality and safety through its accredited certification programs and testing services for the dietary supplement and personal care industries. As part of its independent public health mission, NSF provides accredited certification for dietary supplements, cosmetics and personal care products, and OTC drugs to ensure continued compliance with the most rigorous global standards. We have a few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small square icon in the upper right-hand corner of the slide window, or by hovering your mouse over the lower right-hand corner and dragging the window to the desired size. The slides will advance automatically during the event. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark Help widget in the dock at the bottom of your presentation window. I would now like to introduce today's speakers. We are pleased to be joined today by John Travis, Caroline Mandel, Rob Masterson, and Dave Ellis. John Travis leads NSF's Certified for Sport Dietary Supplement Certification and Banned Substance Screening Program. He works closely with athletes, athletic leagues, and anti-doping agencies, and supplement manufacturers and brands in this role. He has been deeply involved in NSF's sports supplement research and testing programs for more than 25 years. Caroline Mandel is in her 22nd year as a Director of Performance Nutrition at the University of Michigan Athletic Department, providing medical nutrition therapy, nutrition education, and fueling programs to over 900 Division I varsity student athletes competing on 29 teams, and overseeing a staff of 4 performance dietitians. Caroline earned her undergraduate degree in exercise physiology from the University of Massachusetts. Rob Masterson joined Michigan State University in 2016 and serves as the Athletic Department's Director of Performance Nutrition, overseeing the nutrition operations for all varsity teams. In this role, Rob serves the nutritional needs of student athletes by providing science-based nutrition intervention, education, counseling, information, and guidance, with the goal of optimizing overall health and athletic performance. He is a 2009 graduate of Michigan State's dietetics program. Dave is a veteran sports RD in his 40th year of work in sports. Dave is a Director of Performance Nutrition at the University of Nebraska's Department of Athletics, an advisor to Major League Baseball and MLB Players Association on food and supplement security issues. Dave was also the first president of the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietitians Association. Thank you all for joining us today. John, please get us started.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Jennifer. It's my pleasure to be here with my esteemed colleagues. Instead of listening to me talk, let's listen to the experts talk on sports nutrition and the issues that they face in their roles. First question, and I think I will lead off with Caroline. Nutrition needs of elite athletes. What do they eat? What do they need to eat? And what do they want to eat?
Thanks, John. Yeah, that's a really great question. And as I've thought about that one, I think that nutritional needs of elite athletes aren't completely different than the nutritional needs for many healthy people. And our elite athletes need more of some nutrients like calories, carbohydrates, protein, fluid, and maybe less of others. For example, maybe less fiber on a competition day to reduce risk of gastrointestinal distress. Their nutritional needs are going to depend on so many different factors, from growth of adolescent children and young adults to the type of sport the athlete is doing. And nutrition needs to be periodized along with the changing training goals and competition goals throughout the year, the nutrition needs are not static. We also have to consider athletes on special diets with food allergies and intolerances to help adapt what they need. At the end of the day, it really is the dietitian's job to help the elite athlete to create a personalized and sustainable meal plan that fuels their performance and recovery, as well as promoting optimal health, while eating foods that they enjoy. So those words want and need are actually very important, and the dietitian is really the professional of choice to help merge those two considerations.
Very good, Caroline. Rob, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on this topic.
Yeah, thanks, John. It is a good question, and I would just add to what Caroline had mentioned and say that, you know, I guess the question itself, what do they want and what do they need to eat, is a little bit layered and almost contradicting, because in my experience, what I've seen sometimes or many times is that, you know, what our student athletes want and need to eat are oftentimes the same thing. It just depends on the environment and the circumstances and what we do as sports dietitians to help make sure those are the same thing. So, you know, most of us, I think, in you know, general society and public are going to choose a path of least resistance, and our athletes are no different unless we step in and provide the proper education and guidance. So, you know, that's why it's so important for us as the nutrition experts, as sports dietitians, and where we can really be impactful is to educate them, you know, talk to them about planning ahead, reviewing dining hall menu options, going over things like meal preparation. That way, it's a lot easier for them to take into consideration the nutritional value of the foods that they choose over just the convenience factor, because I think it's just human nature and just the environment we live in now where we're going to choose what's easiest and what's put in front of us. Another reason why I think it's so important and why, you know, I think I can speak for everyone on this panel. We're very fortunate to be in athletic departments that support things like fueling stations and dining facilities, so that we can have some control and say as the nutrition experts as to what our athletes get within our facilities.
So Dave, as the 40-year veteran in this group, I'm sure you have seen a lot of changes over the years, and I mean, with this question, you can offer a great perspective.
Yeah, I mean, what they want is probably a food truck to pull up outside their apartment at 10 o'clock at night, and so they can play video games till 1 in the morning and eat. What they need is an appetite when they wake up in the morning, and so we're in a continual battle with the cultural environment that goes on in a collegiate setting where social life starts at 10 o'clock and ends way too late, and their appetites kick up, and getting a meal pattern formatted that isn't really destructive, where they're conforming to what's going on around them on campus or even when they move off campus, is a real challenge. And their first year is vulnerable in the dorms, or second year is vulnerable if they move off campus. You know, it can be a couple of years before they actually get their act together. And of course, we love them to have some real skill sets when it comes to shopping and cooking, so that when they do move off campus, they're just not having somebody deliver food to their apartment or going through the drive-through. So it's a real fundamental thing that we're up against in sports when it comes to getting these athletes to take the healthy route compared to what's going on around them on a typical collegiate campus where there's a party Wednesday through Sunday or more.
So I have a follow-up question for all of you with this. Being from major Division I college schools, you probably see student athletes coming from a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds. Rob, can you comment on how that influences what the athletes eat and their knowledge of nutrition?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Our student athletes come from all over the world, and they do come from such varying backgrounds, and I think that's one of the things that makes our role so challenging, but also so fun in many ways. But yeah, there's no doubt it's a challenge. You may have an athlete who, comes from a very, privileged background where they have already had experience, working with a sports dietitian before they even step on campus, and have a general, good base of knowledge in terms of what food choices to fuel with best. And then you may have someone who's has no idea what a dietitian is or what our role actually is, at least initially. And, speaking to them and talking about, grocery shopping when they may be on a limited budget, or never had the experience, grocery shopping on their own, if at all. I think, Caroline can probably speak to this as well, being not too far out of Detroit. For the longest time that was considered in a lot of ways a food desert, meaning that there wasn't a whole lot of resources for a lot of people coming from that area in terms of getting good quality food, nutrition, groceries. So they come from all walks of life, and you really do have to sit down with an athlete and on an individual basis find out where they're at before you try to really make any changes or make any assumptions as to what you can do, because you may have to start really at the very most basic level in terms of trying to improve their nutrition. That might simply be, I think as Dave already mentioned, doing things like doing a grocery shopping tour with them, making sure that they're actually developing some of those, what we would consider life skills like grocery shopping, something that's very important for them to understand. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but again, that's something I think, as a good sports dietitian, you're really taking into consideration every time you're sitting down or the first time you're meeting with an athlete.
Yeah, that makes me smile thinking when I was in the dorms at Michigan as a freshman, and our thoughts were trying to find somebody who's old enough to buy beer. And I'm sure college students today are no different than what I was thinking. So Caroline, do you have any thoughts on that topic of the socioeconomic backgrounds and how that impacts kids coming into your program?
Absolutely. I appreciate Rob's comments and describing the challenges. But at the same time, when we have the opportunity to work with so many athletes from different states around the United States and so many different countries and so many different backgrounds, I always think of that challenge also as a huge opportunity. First and foremost, as Rob described, doing so much education, and Dave talked about, the shopping, the menu planning, the label reading, the cooking skills. So a lot of our programs have the supermarket tour education programs in place, the cooking classes, cooking demos, from big to small. But I think it's also important to do those baseline assessments and find out, what each individual athlete, assess their knowledge, assess their behaviors, assess their skills, assess their resources, so you can really meet them where they are. And at the same time, I've had the pleasure over the years to learn so much from our student athletes who come from other places around the country and around the world, and we've actually taken that as an opportunity to have our athletes teach each other a little bit about their culture, about their foods, about things that they love, which allows other athletes to get exposed to new things, which is one of the really, huge things about being in a collegiate environment and really embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's excellent. I'd love to hear those thoughts. Dave, so I know you have been here. You originally came in under Dr. Tom Osborne at Nebraska, and we're one of the first sports dietitians. So I'm sure that it's changed over the years. Can you talk to this particular topic in historical context of what you saw back then and what you see now?
Yeah, the rosters have become globally diverse when it comes to the international athletes that you'll find on a tennis teams or the track team. Just to give a couple examples where there seems to be more of an international mix. Certainly every state in the United States is represented, so the regional variances in dietary habits and likes when it comes to food preferences are profound. And I think, it's a great challenge. I think any dietitian who's, got their feet on the ground when it comes to fighting these daily battles to get these athletes engaged with their food supply takes on the unique challenges that come with feeding people from very different backgrounds, culturally, geographically, as really one of their biggest challenges. And, I think you learn a lot, as Caroline mentioned, from, trying to interface with these athletes that actually diversifies the food supply for everybody that you're fueling. In our case, we have all our athletes eating under one roof at our training table. So as we innovate for any segment it is there for everybody to potentially try. So I think that's a neat part of the whole cocktail of humanity that shows up in any one athletic department. And just to put that in perspective, everybody should probably weigh in here. Well, we have 650 athletes, 24 sports. So that is a lot of people from a lot of different places to deal with. And and it's only, I don't know that there'll be any trend that changes it to be less diverse. It's only going to be more diverse as we move forward.
Excellent, Dave. I thank you folks for those very, very enlightening answers. So let's go on to our next question. We've touched a little bit on this. Are there challenges in creating a successful nutrition regimen for the busy life of a college athlete? So I'm going to actually morph that question a little bit based upon all of your comments to the previous question, and that, so a typical college athlete, you have a large variety of athletes, from linemen on the football team and shot putters, to hockey athletes, to endurance runners for cross country, to rowers, both men's and women's teams. I mean, how do you folks address those kinds of challenges in creating these nutrition regimens for not only for the college athlete life, but also the different sports that you have to engage with? And Rob, I'm going to let you go first on this one.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's another really good question, and it is certainly a challenge. I think first you got to start by understanding the sport that you're working with and the athlete, and getting to know what their individual goals are and what they're trying to accomplish. But I guess in a more broader sense, I would certainly say, I think in my experience that one of the biggest challenges is getting our athletes, and even sometimes our coaches and staff that we're also working with, to understand that, we're really talking about behavior change, and that takes time. And we don't necessarily work in an environment where we're given a lot of time or expected to have a lot of time to make these changes. There's oftentimes demands, and coaches are in tough spots where, the truth is their jobs are kind of on the line, and they want things to happen now or yesterday. And so it's a real challenge in trying to balance, sitting down with an athlete, and I think they also come in sometimes with an expectation, of instant gratification and seeing these dramatic, body composition changes and things like that, whether it's on social media or whatever platform. And they almost expect the same thing. And so having some discussion about, what the expectation is and how long, a semblance of a timeline, I guess you could say, is really, really important in my opinion, because nutrition habits are only that because they're consistently done over time. And again, that's we're talking about time here. So I think that's a real challenge, in just making sure that, the student athletes specifically understand that, they're not going to get a whole lot out of, a single 5-minute discussion with a sports dietitian, at least not initially, and that they should expect to have regular follow-up and regular communication with them. And that over the periods of, weeks or months can really lead to lasting beneficial dietary changes. That's certainly one area that I think is a challenge. And then I think the other one, and we touched a little bit on this in our kind of brainstorming sessions when we all got together wanting to do this, which is, we now live in a world where it's almost like information overload, or sometimes misinformation overload. There's so many different platforms, and we're just a click away from essentially accessing any information that we want. I've noticed a lot of times now we have a lot of athletes who come in who have misperceptions as to what an ideal diet is for their sport or for them personally, and they may be following, a so-called guru or influencer on Instagram, and that's where they're getting their information. And I found the real challenge, especially in the last couple of years, is, it's gone from working with athletes who may have minimal, at least initially minimal, nutrition knowledge and understanding, to they believe they have a lot, but it's misinformed or misaligned with what ultimately we as sports dietitians would like to see for them. So getting them to kind of unlearn some of that information as opposed to just learning what it is you're trying to teach can be an added challenge. But again, it's something that I think really can be exciting in some ways, and a good challenge, because you ultimately want any student athlete that sits down with you to walk away knowing a little bit more about how to fuel their bodies and how to improve their health through nutrition.
Thanks, Rob. That's an excellent response. So, Caroline, same question to you. With the different sports, I know you have the multitude of sports, and just like from endurance to strength to stick and ball sports, with these athletes, how do you approach those challenges?
Yeah, I think Rob bringing up, the time and the resources, I think, we're all challenged with that. And on the other side of the coin, I think the staffing models in these, Division I athletic departments is the performance dietitians are going to be working with more than one team, so we're not always present at all times to answer those valuable questions. Since 2014, when the NCAA deregulated feeding for athletes, it did create new touch points, the training table, the grab-and-go breakfast, the fueling stations. So dietitians are present in order to, do what I think of as more informal education. Instead of scheduling an hour and sitting down with a team and putting up a PowerPoint and that kind of thing. I mean, our athletes really don't have time for all of that. And as performance dietitians, when you're juggling multiple teams, we're always looking for the most efficient ways to educate the student athletes, to engage them, to get them really interested and motivated to change. So I think with deregulation, we've been able to be so much more present, to be in front of the athletes when they're saying, oh, hey, I meant to ask you about, this new restaurant, or, can you review this supplement for me? Or, I really cramped at practice yesterday. And so we're able to be more timely in that. And then along the second thing that Rob was talking about, it really made me think about how much the performance dietitian who's providing all of this evidence-based sports nutrition care in a world where the research is helping us to really change our practice, grow our practices with new knowledge. We're competing with so much noise. Rob mentioned the social media. There's so many influencers out there that sometimes those voices are louder for this generation of college student athlete, or just living in a culture where everyone thinks that they're the expert. So, coming up with really creative ways to meet the challenge, to get the student athlete's attention, to have them really think about food as such an important training tool to advance, their athletic careers and reach their goals.
I know I'm going to talk about, so when I went to college, as an 18-year-olds tend to think they know everything. So Dave, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, these busy athletes, right? Oddly enough, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is keeping them on schedule from the time their feet at the floor in the morning to the time they finally pull the plug in the evening on a sequence of fueling events and hydration opportunities over the course of the day that they don't fall behind on. Literally, these athletes, their demands are unique in that they need more calories, they need more frequent intakes, they have bigger fueling or hydration challenges than people that are just ambling to class on campus for the most part. And so if they get behind, there's only so much they can get down at one time, and sooner or later they just run out of time. And that's a real big challenge in that, it can create a binge eating pattern late in the evening where they're trying to play catch up and their appetites finally catch up and they've got more time. And then it sets a stage for a kind of a fail out of the gates the next morning because they don't have an appetite to eat, practice, and it repeats. And so to me, that is, a prompting, being able to get past all the noise everybody's talking about and prompt these athletes to stay on a sequence, a pattern over the course of the day that serves them best when it comes to outworking the competition and facilitating recovery and having a strong immune system is a real big challenge because college does have so many distractions, and social media has only made it worse as far as the distractibility. And I'll add one more point. You got to coach when these kids are ready to learn. I'm always taken back when I'm standing at football practice and, the last thing in the world I think somebody's going to come up and talk to me about is their goals, or, you know, a nutrition concept or a weight gain, weight loss concept that, you know, here we are watching practice and they're getting ready to take some reps, and suddenly they've decided they want to ask a question while I'm close, and we have these amazing conversations in very short bursts, as Caroline was mentioning, and you got to seize that. I mean, I think when these athletes are ready to learn, you gotta get what you can get done at that time, and take a flyer for wrapping up that conversation when you get done with practice, or that you cross paths with them during their next lifting session or their next meal where you're going to be around them. So being good on your feet, that's a big part of our job.
That's excellent. That's actually great to hear that you're able to engage athletes in all kinds of areas, and not just like kind of a classroom setting or when you're actually feeding them. The last question: what role do dietary supplements and functional foods play in the success of a nutrition program for the collegiate athlete? And with this question, I'm going to ask Dave to respond first, please.
Well, you know, 40 years is a long time to be around the evolution of the dietary supplement industry, for better or worse, and functional food manifestations that are evolving rapidly before our eyes. You know, so when you think about conventional foods where somebody's added a functional ingredient, it's probably a typical of an amalgamation that might surface in the supplement industry. You know, it is a very fast-moving, ever-evolving landscape. And, you know, our athletes do bump into it. Certainly with name, image, and likeness right now, there are companies that are pursuing our athletes to connect their reputations to the supplement brand or functional food. You know, it's a very interesting time. And for everybody out there, you know, our challenge as sports dietitians is to make sure that, you know, drug-tested athletes don't stumble into something in an era of hypersensitive drug testing, picogram level sensitivity in drug testing, that can result in a positive drug test and loss of eligibility. You know, certainly we pray that it's never anything that we would fund or supply, and that we pray that these athletes don't stumble into something without talking to us about it that could get them in trouble. And so, you know, we're always, it's a constant challenge, this space, but it's not without its merits either. I mean, there's a reason that we as health professionals, sports dietitians, stay on top of what's going on in this space, because there's some performance value. There's definitely some health and well-being value from this space. We've just endured a challenging pandemic where immune obviously came to the surface as far as a big priority for athletes who had to congregate and fly and get on buses and airplanes before just about anybody else was out moving around. And so we value things that have surfaced in this space, you know, turmeric, casein, forever, caffeine, and creatine. These are all things that, you know, work, and our athletes are going to go seek them out because they work. And, you know, we have to be able to steer them towards safe sources, supply chains that are reliable, third-party accredited products to prove that there are no banned substances in them. And, you know, also more than anything, get our athletes to slow down, not be impulsive, and come to us for advice before they venture into these spaces. But, you know, it's a space that has a lot of merit and yet a lot of challenges.
Thanks, Dave. So, Rob, how do you feel about where nutritional supplements and functional foods play in how you work with your athletes at Michigan State?
Yeah, I think they can play a very important one, and ultimately their role is, you know, really dependent upon the goals and the needs of the student athlete. You know, I would echo Dave's sentiments in the sense that, you know, it's really, we would be naive, I think, as he said, you know, to believe that they're not, you know, our student athletes aren't looking into this area in terms of trying to find supplements or functional foods that will provide them an edge in their performance. And so it is. It's really, really critical for us, and that's, to make sure that they're choosing or coming to us with questions and before they actually purchase a product or coming to us and asking us if it's safe and effective. And again, that's why it's so important to have programs and like NSF and third-party certification, because it's absolutely necessary. And so I would say it definitely can play a role. It's super important. I would say that, again, it is dependent upon their individual goals and needs. I always first like to find out where they are just from a more baseline, I guess, situation, in the sense that, are they eating consistently? Are they avoiding going more than 3-4 hours without having something to eat, a meal or a snack? Addressing those sorts of things first before we really jump into the more performance-focused nutrition, the hydration, electrolyte balance, pre and post match or game fueling, and recovery. What are they doing there? Really, and then jumping into supplements. It really starts with what they're doing on the most broad sense. What does their overall diet look like? The supplements and even the performance-focused nutrition interventions that we may implement or want to implement with those athletes are not going to be nearly as effective if we're not making sure that they're doing the most basic things, getting breakfast, lunch, and dinner with some snacks in between, maybe additional meals if necessary. We got to start there first. But no doubt, as Dave said, these supplements and functional foods can play a very important role, and there's certainly merit.
Very good, Rob. Caroline, could you offer some insight here on how you handle these?
Absolutely. And, throughout my career, supplements have been a big part of athletes' lives. So it's a huge area that dietitians invest themselves in learning about, and there's always something new. And our role really is to educate them and help them make an informed decision against the backdrop of the banned substance drug testing. At Michigan, along with nutrition education and fueling, we do a considerable amount of data collection, anywhere from body composition assessments, hydration testing, and lab values. So with this testing, we are then able to use dietary supplements in the truest sense of the word, with a traditional definition that a supplement is something that helps to augment the diet. So if I have an athlete where we're running our iron screening protocol and they have depleted iron stores or they have iron deficiency anemia, certainly on a medical side, then iron supplementation along with nutrition education and food changes are the standard of care for treatment. Over the last several years, we also started tracking vitamin D levels, and we know vitamin D is important in calcium absorption for bone health and preventing risk of bone fracture and injury. And at the same time, there's been evidence that came to light around vitamin D and helping prevent upper respiratory infections with influenza, and that's been extrapolated to some of the COVID data. And so we're real interested and invested in thinking about, particularly up here north of the latitude of Atlanta, we're up here in the north, of our vitamin D status. We're very cognizant of that. And then emerging evidence around the omega-3 fatty acid supplements and our omega-3, omega-6 ratios. So on the medical side, there's some real compelling data, and definitely schools have put that into practice. At the same time, then you look at the performance supplements, and I've been, really intrigued with, of course, the protein supplements. Athletes can get adequate protein from food, but the supplements just add a nice layer of certainly convenience, and when they're third-party tested, of course, safety, and learning more about, the different types of protein from whey and casein, et cetera, or, the emergence of these plant-based proteins for plant-based, the diets, or the athletes who follow a plant-based diet. And also then, in my entire career, I know that, creatine was demonized for a long time, but, 3-4 decades of research is really showing that there's some real positives behind creatine. While we're not allowed to purchase and provide that at the NCAA Division I level, certainly the evidence for muscle building, for help with injury rehab and return to play protocols, and even possibly now concussion, is very intriguing, and there may certainly be room for some protocols for that, recommending those products, or even having our physicians, prescribe some of those. With the functional foods, the thing I always think about is some of them can be very convenient, and again, our earlier conversation about the athletes and time and trying to fit everything in with their consistent meal patterns is really hard. So, foods that fall into that area between a supplement and a food, certainly, the recovery shakes certainly can be very convenient. Many are very cost effective as well. The shelf stable and food safety aspect is also really important to us as dietitians, as well as to the athletes. Many of these products also are really convenient for travel, so we also have to think about fueling at home around training, but fueling at home around competition. And then our teams really appreciate when we're able to replicate what we do successfully at home, if we can replicate that on the road. And so many of these functional foods make a lot of sense. They travel well, and we're able to then create that predictable fueling and recovery pattern no matter where they are.
Wow, you folks have a challenging task ahead of you in your roles at your different institutions that you work from, dealing with the different backgrounds of your athletes to their busy daily lives, from anywhere from 6 in the morning till 10, 11 p.m. at night from your description. So you're to be applauded for your diligence and for your dedication to your student athletes. I'm going to give a little plug here for NSF. So NSF, you've heard our three panelists speak about third-party certification. NSF is our third-party certifier. We do have a resource for athletes. We have our sport app, and also for brands too, where we have a program where we will test dietary supplements and functional foods to ensure that they, one, meet their label claims, two, that they're not contaminated with things like heavy metals or microbials like E. coli, and then three, that they do not contain any performance-enhancing substances that would cause an athlete to test positive and cause them to lose their chance to participate in their team sports or their individual sports. So that's my plug for NSF, and thank you folks for participating. And I did have more questions, but I'll save them for the Q&A sessions, and then I will turn this over to Jen.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dave, Rob, Caroline, for that really informative discussion. Before we get started on the question and answer session, I just want to remind our audience how you can submit questions. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of the presentation window. Okay, let's get started. Our first question is there anything that you would want supplement or functional food brands to know about how or why these athletes take these products? And I'll just leave that to any one of our excellent speakers today to dive in.
I'd like to take a first stab at this, Dave Ellis. What I would love brands to be aware of is the fact that the athletes could get into this, make this purchasing decision on a very impulsive level, a desire to alter their body composition, hopefully at a smart time of the year in the off season, a performance factor like just general energy status. But it's really imperative that the people that are manufacturing and supplying ingredients in this space and manufacture finished product are aware that when you get down to picogram level drug testing sensitivity, that these athletes have to absolutely have assurance that what they're consuming is not adulterated in any fashion, because until there are thresholds in the anti-doping world for every compound that's out there that could be a positive doping agent, and the 270 plus number, I would imagine by now. John, you can tell us later on that. The reality is that any picogram amount could trigger a positive, even if it's not enough to elicit a doping response, truly of any value in the athlete. If it's there, it's there. And until there's thresholds that say a little bit's not doping and a lot is doping, and there's a threshold that you trigger, it's going to be a black and white problem that if it's there, you're positive. And athletes give a very disruptive appeal process they would have to go through to try to fight to prove their innocence, from maybe supplying the product for testing that caused the problem, figuring out what product it was of many they could be taking. When we approach brands on behalf of athletes and let them know that this is a popular brand and it would really be great if you would consider third-party accreditation to somebody like NSF Certified for Sport, whether you're a functional food or a dietary supplement, we're on our knees begging for them to consider it. And, it's a large undertaking. We understand that. But, on behalf of these drug-tested athletes, whether they're collegiate or pro or Olympic, or even military personnel that might lose their jobs if they're drug-tested, it's a very important concept.
Those are really good points. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on this question?
This is Caroline, and, along the lines like Dave was saying about, what are these athletes looking for, maybe altering the body comp, or maybe it's a performance factor, from the viewpoint of a collegiate student athlete who maybe is injured or maybe has been sick. There's so many products out there with so many claims around helping to prevent injury and illness or treat injury and illness or speed return to play. From the athlete's viewpoint, they'll do anything to, get the knee better, get through the concussion, have a stronger immune system, et cetera. And I think it just makes them very susceptible to false claims. And, in the viewpoint, I know from talking with folks at the Big Ten, they look upon someone who tests positive for a performance-enhancing drug just strictly as cheating. If it's a street drug, for a positive drug test, the attitude is, oh, that's an addiction, that's an illness. But products that are tainted with banned substances is really looked upon as cheating. And, again, we've really prioritized only purchasing and providing products that have been third-party tested and quite evidence-based.
Absolutely. And anyone else?
Yeah, John, this is John. I'm just going to, so both Dave and Caroline talked about the tainted supplements that could possibly cause an athlete to test positive. So that's part of that's the great unknown. That's part of why we do what we do at NSF is that there's not really a good knowledge base. There's one peer-reviewed scientific article about microdosing of a particular substance. In this case, is ostarine. It's a SARM, selective androgen receptor modulator. But those are typically what we're seeing as contaminant levels in dietary supplements. If we're looking at contaminant levels, we're talking nanograms or even what Dave said, picograms. So what we don't know, and the reason why we still test these is that we don't know if these levels cause athletes to test positive. It's just not known. Now, there have been cases in the anti-doping world where athletes have been sanctioned for I think there was one, it was 40 picograms of ostarine, and they found, I think it was 120 picograms in a supplement. So the athlete was able to represent, and this is outside of collegiate sports, but was able to successfully defend himself. Now, I don't know if anyone knows how small amount of picogram is, but it is very tiny. Not enough to give anyone even a sniff of performance enhancement.
John, how many analytes are you up to now at NSF on your drug testing component of your certification?
So we're at 280 right now, and as you know, as the anti-doping world evolves, new drugs are developed for different legitimate reasons, whether it's sarcopenia, which is muscle wasting disease for older people that are in hospitals like Cameroon and stuff. So there's a lot of drug development in that area. As you can see, or if one could think about it, then that can spill over into the sports world where a new drug is developed. There's patent out there. There's information that actually causes skeletal muscle growth, and they know testers are not testing for it. So that's a situation we're in.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Let's move to our second question. What types of products are trending for your athletes?
This is Rob Masterson at Michigan State. If I could jump in, I would just say, one that I've noticed more recently is products that are more plant-based or have some sort of potential sustainability component and benefit. I've noticed a lot of athletes over the past couple of years have come to me with an interest in moving towards more of a plant-based diet. And initially that was something that I felt, or at least in my own experience, so anecdotal, but that the benefits and the reason why they were wanting to go towards that route were the potential health benefits. But now I've noticed that there's actually, sometimes the more primary reason for that is actually because they believe it's a more sustainable or environmentally friendly option as well. So if I could say there's one trend that I've noticed, it would be down that path.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to chime in?
I'm getting questions about some products that claim to increase immunity. I think it probably started at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. It continues on today with we're getting into the winter flu season, et cetera, and athletes, really feel strongly that they don't have time to, miss out on training and competition due to illness, and some of our updated protocols around that. I just don't know that there's a lot of evidence out there, and some of the products have never gotten even close to the third-party testing. But every day I'm learning about new things on the market that we didn't know about maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I'll throw a big one in is sleep. I think there's real explosion in how to take advantage of deep quality rest and the recuperative benefits that come, and essentially HGH pulsing more with deeper cycles of sleep, and all the recovery benefits that come there, and the immune benefits that would come also, and the memory, the learning benefits, you name it. I mean, the benefits are huge. So sleep is an explosive category, and the nootropics category overall, when it comes to alertness when you are awake, of course, is a explosive area, and one that's really riddled with vulnerability, because anytime you get into the nootropic space, you get into a vulnerable space where it might just be easier for a fraudster to go buy an active pharmaceutical ingredient and put it in a product that makes the athlete's hair stand up, and for them to feel a real caffeine stimulant-like benefit, a focus benefit, when in reality it's actually drugs. So we move with great caution in that space.
Well, that's a good word of caution. We know a lot of brands looking into these areas, so it's good for them to hear. Another question from the audience: are there challenges with brands now approaching athletes with sponsorship deals?
I'll take first stab at that. Yeah, we've seen some pretty benign multivitamin type companies with pretty good reputations come at some of our bigger name athletes. We've seen some pretty sketchy muscle building supplement companies come after our athletes, and luckily our athletes are pretty good about coming to the dietitian, in my case, or my other dietitians on our staff, and asking about the opportunity before they would engage that opportunity, and we've been able to coach them on the positive and negatives to think through, and it's really ultimately their decision. But mainly NIL, name, image, and likeness, for those that are out there listening that aren't really that close to college athletics, that have given athletes a chance to benefit from their reputation as a collegiate athlete financially. A lot of them are getting some pretty superficial deals with a local burrito place, whatever it may be. Maybe you're getting some free food for some posts on social media, but I don't know that at the street level for everybody on these rosters, you can't say they're all benefiting at this point yet, and some of them are pretty small potato deals.
Great. Anyone want to add to that?
I think with the name, image, and likeness legislation that passed several months ago, that with supplement companies approaching student athletes anywhere from retail stores to different hydration products, et cetera, for me it created an opportunity to re-educate about dietary supplements, to remind our student athletes that the nutrition staff is available and we can review those products, because Even if they're getting a sponsorship deal, they still have to follow the NCAA supplement and banned substance guidelines, and they're still responsible for what they put in their bodies. So it's important just to really align ourselves with them and support them and try to educate them about those products and their risk.
Great.
I was just going to add that, as Caroline had mentioned, I think it's offered a challenge in the sense that, as Dave had mentioned, there are times where maybe not the most reputable companies or companies approach our athletes, and so there's a challenge in there, making sure that they understand the risks, and when it comes to name, image, and likeness, they're really kind of jeopardizing that I component, that image part, their own image, and they have to understand that if they decide to align themselves with those, there's risks that could potentially come with that. But as Caroline mentioned, and it offers us an opportunity to educate our athletes. So it's really kind of opened up the dialogue here at Michigan State in a good way of educating or re-educating athletes about supplements and supplement safety. And so in that way, it's actually been quite good. So, yeah.
That's great to hear. Okay, thank you all for that. And I think we have time for one more question. Here's one. What changes have you seen in the products athletes take with COVID-19 being an elevated focus?
So I'll take that question, Dave. We're seeing a lot of products. I get questions nearly every day about different products to help with supporting the immune system, or I see a lot of claims about boosting the immune system, and those of us in science are aware that someone with a boosted immune system may actually have a dangerous autoimmune disease. So we don't want to boost the immune system, and I don't know that the claims hold any water necessarily. And we have to remember that the athlete brain sometimes thinks that if a little bit is good, then more is better. And I've seen some athletes take very high doses of products or ingredients that certainly may be NSF certified for sport, third-party tested, or seemingly innocuous, but high doses can still cause toxicities and can still cause harm. And we certainly don't want athletes putting anything in their body, if they don't know what it is. Some products I don't even know how to pronounce right now, so I'm still working that out. But again, we don't want them putting stuff in their body that might hurt them. So taking a step back and asking the athletes if they're doing the basics. Are you washing your hands and wearing your mask? And can we work on your sleep, as Dave talked about earlier, spreading meals and snacks out throughout the day instead of the athlete epidemic that I remember when I first started working here at Michigan back in the 1990s, of athletes who undereat by day and overeat by night, and no wonder they're not hungry in the morning. But that underfueling during the day not only harms performance, but might make someone susceptible to the germs that are around us all the time.
Perfect. Thank you so much for those insights, Caroline. And I think that we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank the audience for attending and for participating in today's event. And I want to thank our speakers, John, Dave, Rob, Caroline, for all of the valuable information that you shared with our audience. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, NSF International, for making today's webcast possible. We'd like to ask everyone in the audience to participate in a brief survey. You can see the survey to the right of your screen. You'll receive an email alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay. We invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. We hope to see you all next time. Thank you and goodbye.